Okay. Well, hello and welcome to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library. My name is Eugene Rule, and I'll be your host for today's program on the Labor Education Project of the AFL-CIO International Operations, sometimes known as the AFL-CIA, with our speakers, Kim Scipes and Steve Zeltzer. And while you're getting settled and waiting for a few more latecomers, let me give you some background on our library and our institute. Our library was named in memory of two remarkable individuals, Karl Nebel, a refugee from Nazi Germany, and Roscoe Proctor, a farm worker and communist labor organizer. Their book collections form the core of what became the Nebel-Proctor Marxist Library for Social Research. In 1996, the library moved into our current home of 6501 Telegraph Avenue in Oakland, about a mile south of the UC Berkeley campus. And of course, now we live in cyberspace, but that's our physical home. About 2004, the Institute for the Critical Study of Society, or ICSS, was formed to further the library's goals of preserving our written heritage, as well as supporting emerging struggles for radical racial and gender equality and for socialism. The members of ICSS are active in different aspects of people's struggles in the Bay Area and globally. Some are affiliated with specific political parties and tendencies, others are not. We respect one another, but we do not necessarily agree on all issues. Accordingly, the opinions expressed in our lectures, workshops, and publications are those of the authors only and do not represent a group consensus on the issues discussed. We are united, however, in our respect for the work of Karl Marx and our belief that his work will remain as important for the class struggles of the future as they have been for the past. And as a group, we continue to draw inspiration from the work of Karl Marx, including or especially his 11th thesis on Feuerbach. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. And these words express very well the work of today's speakers, Kim Scipes and Steve Zeltzer. Dr. Kim Scipes is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at Purdue University Northwest and author of several books, including Building Global Labor Solidarity in a Time of Accelerating Globalization. And I think everybody here in the Bay Area knows Steve Zeltzer as a labor/community organizer and general troublemaker. With a weekly program on KPFA called Work Week, organizer of our annual Labor Fest, and also organizer of No Nukes Action. So I will turn it over to Kim and Steve, who may say a bit more about themselves and who will talk for about 45 to 60 minutes, after which time we will turn to Q&A and comments. We will end the meeting or the recording at 12:30. And everybody, I trust, does know that the program is being recorded, after which time we will continue our open discussion, but unrecorded until 1 p.m. So with that, here's Kim and Steve.
Okay, good morning for you all. I'm in the Midwest, so it's afternoon already for me, but I'm delighted to see everyone here. The way Steve and I have worked this is I'm going to start out and talk about the AFL-CIO's foreign policy, or actually labor's foreign policy, and I'll lay some things out, and then Steve's going to tell us about LEPAIO, the new effort to change the AFL-CIO's foreign policy. So with that, I'm going to begin. All right, as I assume most of you know, labor has had a foreign policy. it's not often put out very clearly. There's a lot of misconceptions and things like this. So I have been doing work on this since 1983, looking at their operations in the US and around the world. In 2010, I brought out a book called AFL-CIO's Foreign Policy, forgot the title of my own book, AFL-CIO's Secret War Against Developing Country Workers, Solidarity or Sabotage, in which I look at labor's foreign policy. One of the things where there is confusion, I mean, first of all, a lot of workers, and in fact, I think most of the leaders of the labor movement don't even know of labor's foreign policy. It's never been clearly brought out and explicated to people. It's hidden, they've lied about it, things such as this. For those that know somewhat about it, maybe you heard about the AFL-CIO's involvement in the coup in Chile. You might have some idea about it, but most people who know about the labor's foreign policy think it began in the late 40s in the war against communism, blah, blah, blah. The reality is, no, it's much longer shaping of this. It goes back to the late 1890s. Sam Gompers made a couple of statements against the pending Spanish-American War, but once the war began, both in Cuba and in the Philippines, Gompers signed on to it. He also supported U.S. efforts in Mexico during the Mexican Revolution, which, as I assume everyone knows, happened before the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. He supported the U.S. policies in World War I, and then, of course, after the Bolshevik Revolution, was resolutely opposed to the Soviet Union and any type of, quote, communism or socialism or whatever. Now, it was never a rational analysis of these different movements or anything like that. It was sort of an ideological reaction. But Gompers was president for 37 of the first 38 years of the AFL, so his presence was overwhelming. Set the stage for this. Now, after World War II, all right. So, first of all, during the war, as I'm sure most of us know, the labor movement had given a no-strike policy, but starting about 43, when the war started to turn in the U.S. and its allies' favor, you started having workers start striking and going against the program on the shop floor. I don't know if you know this, but there were more people that were injured on the shop floor in the U.S. before D-Day than were injured in combat. These are U.S. troops, not Soviet troops, obviously. But anyway, as the war proceeded, you see workers refusing to accept this management domination, fighting and stuff like this, which led after the war, within the first year after the war, massive strikes across the country. We know about the steel, the auto workers, and the meat packers, national strikes. There were the Teamsters went out. All in all, something like 116 million days of production were lost in 1946. Okay. In reaction to this, the Republicans were able to take over Congress in November 46. They passed the Taft-Hartley Act, which basically banned this. It also, as we all know, had the anti-communist provision, things like this. A terrible attack on the labor movement, which much of the conservative members of the CIO did not fight, including Philip Murray and especially Walter Reuther. So this is a time when the left was kicked out of the CIO, and it was a time when the anti-communist war was spread around the world, and labor joined this. And you see this in 1954. They helped overthrow the democratically elected government in Guatemala. Well, the labor's foreign policy got worse in the 60s because in response to the Cuban Revolution, they intensified their efforts to control labor throughout Latin America. And you also had their participation in the Brazilian coup in 1964, and then, of course, in Chile in 1973. All of this has been documented pretty strongly. This is not This is not speculation, and credit goes mostly to Fred Hirsch, who I think many of you might have known. Fred was a plumber out of San Jose who first revealed this as early as 1974 and continued on throughout his life in fighting the AFL-CIO's foreign policy. During the 80s, we were able to raise a lot of interest in this, and eventually it became a factor in the 1995 election to succeed Lane Kirkland, and then his Secretary General, Tom, God, I'm blanking on Tom's last name, but anyway, he was only there for a brief time. And John Sweeney of Service Employees International Union came out and said he was going to do away with the AFL-CIO's regional operations. Okay. Now, by the way, one thing I forgot to lay out, forgot to include, was one of the things as people have learned about the AFL-CIO and then the AFL-CIO's foreign policy, was that they've assumed that it was done from the outside, whether the US government, the White House, the State Department, or the CIA. My research over the years, and like I say, I've been doing this for almost 40 years, is that no, the foreign policy comes from within labor, not from without. Okay, this is pretty much the dominant view today, that it comes from within. And like I say, all of these things happened during this time. However, Sweeney did get elected in 95, and by 1997, he ended AFLE, the American Federation of Free Labor, Asian American Free Labor Institute. He ended AFIELD, the American Institute for Free Labor Development in Latin America, and the African American Labor Center, AALC, in Africa. He replaced it with something initially called the American Center for International Labor Solidarity, ACILS, or more commonly, the Solidarity Center. So, and they've always been a bit dicey on how they refer to this to the Solidarity Center. They claim it's affiliated with the AFL-CIO, and that's bullshit. They're a wholly owned subsidiary. They're controlled by the labor movement. Both Fred Redmond, the Secretary Treasurer, and Liz Schuler, the President of the AFL-CIO, have been head of the Solidarity Center and have worked with the National Endowment for Democracy. Okay, so I have to talk about NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, because that's who's running a lot of this work today. So in 1983, after the revelations about the CIA and their secret wars and also labor's involvement, that freedom-loving Democrat Ronald Reagan decided to put forth what became known as the National Endowment for Democracy, or NED. Now, the way they've set this up is NED is basically controlled by 4 different operations. One is the National Democratic Institute, which is the international wing of the Democratic Party. It is joined by the International Republican Institute, again, the foreign wing of the Republican Party. It is joined by the international wing of the US Chamber of Commerce, supposedly the arch enemy of the AFL-CIO domestically, but they work together internationally, and then the Solidarity Center. So these 4 groups are the mainstay of the National Endowment for Democracy. Now, when you talk about the National Endowment for Democracy, we have to look at this and have some nuance. They claim to be promoting democracy around the world. I mean, their rhetoric is pretty amazing. What you have to realize is that there are 2 types of democracy. Now, the type that we've all grown up with is the one person, one vote. If you're affected, you get to have your say, things such as this. This is only one type of democracy. It's been labeled popular democracy or bottom-up democracy or grassroots democracy. That's the type we've been told about. The other type is something we're not educated about, and that's the top-down or constrained or polyarchal democracy, which is a top-down form of democracy. This is a form of democracy where basically ideas get put forth before the elite, before a limited number of people who then okay it and then allow people to vote on. But it's not the same. It's very different than the bottom up. So that what you have happen is a constrained democracy, not that people are getting to address these issues as they see them, but as the elites see them. And then only with the elite permission do they get to address this. The NED is promoting this top-down, this polyarchal democracy as though it's bottom-up democracy. And so they're going around the world and attacking different countries. They're operating in over 90 countries around the world. But what they're promoting is this top-down democracy, again, as though it was from bottom up. So this has been one of the, so it's a very confusing thing. And unless you understand that, their rhetoric becomes very, very problematic. So the Solidarity Center has worked with them. They're helping create the strategy, the overall viewpoint, and then the Solidarity Center will apply to the NED for grants to pass on to groups around the world. And they are operating in over 60 countries around the world. Now, this is the Solidarity Center. The NED is actually operating in over 90. But the Solidarity Center is working in over 60 of them. They have never given an honest report about their operations, why they're in particular countries, what they're doing, who they're working with, what their purpose is, etc. They have never given this to any leaders in the labor movement other than those involved in foreign policy. So this is a small group of people who are running labor's foreign policy. They're acting in the name of American workers, yet not telling American workers anything about it. Their money comes from the overwhelmingly from the U.S. government. Over 90% of their funding comes through the State Department and the National Endowment for Democracy, etc. So working people generally do not, and particularly union members, don't know what they're doing or why or how much or anything, and they have no control over this. This is a top-down operation, and it's, like I say, it's operating around the world. And where we know for sure of their operations is in Venezuela. In 2002, there was the coup attempt against Hugo Chavez that fortunately failed, but the NED was in there supporting that. They didn't take a leading role in the coup, but they were supporting it. They were lying about the involvement of the oil workers, a guy named Fidel. I'm blanking on his name, I'm sorry. But anyway, he was the leader of the oil workers union, who was one of the leaders of the coup attempt. And they lied and hid about that and denied that ever since. The reality is they knew immediately that the labor movement was involved, and they hid this, etc. Now, the problem with the problem for activists is that the NED is more sophisticated than the old institutes. The institutes were all evil. There was nothing good about A Field or the others. NED has done some work that at least is not bad. I won't necessarily say it's good, but it's not necessarily bad. So that we have to look, and we can't have a blanket overview of them. We have to be more nuanced and look at particular cases such as that. So this has been going on for years. Like I say, both Fred Redmond and Liz Schuler have been involved. In the Solidarity Center and working with the NED. So there's no question about this. And that I'm going to turn it over to Steve now to talk about some of our efforts that to challenge this. So Steve, if you would, go ahead. You're muted.
Thanks, Kim. First, I wanted to say a correction. Our program, Work Week, used to be on KPFA, but it was removed unilaterally by the former manager, Quincy McCoy. So we're no longer on Pacifica. I am part of Pacifica Fight Back, which is fighting for democracy, activist programming, and democratic governance, and against support for U.S. imperialism by a lot of the programming now on KPFA that's being put out. I'm also a member of the Journalist Union, Pacific Media Workers Guild, United Front Committee for the Labor Party, and No Nukes Action, which is organizing against nuclear power. And also we want to continue the Diablo Canyon plant now and give a subsidy of 1.4 billion. This is Newsom's latest plan to keep Diablo Canyon going, even though we're already paying, ratepayers are already paying to close it down. And also we're going to be having an action on September the 26th to protest the state paid funeral of Abe, who was a right-wing nationalist, denialist, supporter of war and militarization of Japan. So anyway, those are some of the things I've been involved in. So when we talk about the AFL-CIO, the formation of the AFL-CIO, we have to recognize that it came on the heels of the defeat of the fascists, but also the rise of pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist trading bureaucracy in the United States. That even though the Gompers had been in favor of he had been in favor of our intervention in Puerto Rico and the Philippines, bringing democracy there. The AFL-CIO was a culmination, a coming together of anti-communist union officials, the government and corporations who wanted a pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist trade union federation. So the formation of the AFL-CIO was central to that. It purged communist, militant, socialist out of the unions throughout the United States. And then it, as a premise of the Federation, said they would support US foreign policy. So they supported militarization, United States efforts to militarize the world and set up bases around the world. And the leadership of the AFL-CIO, not just Meany, but Albert Shanker and many other officials were actively involved all around the world with Irving Brown and others who set up anti-communist unions in Turkey, Turkish. They set up unions in France. They set up unions in Japan. They set up pro-corporate unions around the world. They also supported Zionism. They, along with Russia, the Soviet Union, supported the formation of Israel. But the United States worked with the Histadrut, the Israeli Trade Union Federation, to do training in Africa in the 60s. And they supported the apartheid South Africa, the AFL-CIO, where they supported Buthelezi. So this history is not known by U.S. trade unions, and that's one of the reasons we formed the Labor Education Project in AFL-CIO International Operations, because this history is unknown to most workers, most trade unions, and is critical to understanding the role of the AFL-CIO and other unions around in the United States. And we fought at the last convention of the CWA for a resolution around this issue, and were attacked by the bureaucrats, and they passed a resolution supporting the role of the AFL-CIO internationally. The CWA was involved, Bernie, the president, former president, with the CIA in Latin America, supporting right-wing unions and coups in Latin America and Brazil and other countries. So I want to get into one issue, some histories of the AFL-CIO. One of the things now that the AFL-CIO is involved in, and all the unions, including my own, is supporting the war in Ukraine as bringing democracy. That's what they argue. They're fighting for democracy for the Ukrainians. And while I'm opposed to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the fact of the matter is the United States was involved in a coup in 2014, and funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. And we trained right-wing trade unionists. They are quote unquote trained. And we supported the privatization of Ukraine and also in other Eastern European countries. The United States saw the collapse of the Soviet Union as a vehicle to take over, privatize, and capture the wealth of these countries. So the AFL-CIO, Randy Weingarten and others went to Ukraine and supported the coup and were involved in supporting also fascists. The United States has been involved in supporting fascists in Ukraine and in other countries around the world. But in Ukraine, they train them. Even Haaretz, the Israeli publication, protested the support by Israel for arming fascists in Ukraine. So this privatization policy of the AFL-CIO through the National Endowment for Democracy on a global level continues around the world. And of course, one of the results of the Chilean coup, which the AFL-CIO supported, was to put in Pinochet, who then privatized the pension system and other public services in Chile and brought in the privatizers from Chicago boys to privatize the economy. And they've done that into other countries. And this issue of supporting apartheid, I think, is important in the history of the AFL-CIO, because the AFL-CIO offered $1 million to through the CIA to Buthelezi, Chief Buthelezi, who was it was for it was against the socialist South Africa. He was against the unions, the COSATU, the democratic unions in South Africa that were forming. In fact, not only was he against them, but he organized thugs to kill trade unions who were on strike. And Buthelezi's gangs killed one woman that I interviewed, a trade unionist, Jabu Nadlovu, at the British company, BART, that was on strike. So British Tires, BAT. And so this role of the AFL-CIO is really pernicious. And again, there are crimes that have been committed by the AFL-CIO in the name of labor. And that's one of the reasons we have to educate trade unions about that and make the AFL-CIO accountable. Now, I want to get into what's going on now in Latin America, because this is of great importance. One of the things that the AFL-CIO has done through the Solidarity Center is to say that they support democratic unions. And they basically fund and support pro-capitalist type unions. By capitalist, I mean unions that don't challenge US imperialism, are not challenging the social system of capitalism. And in Mexico, as many people know, the unions have been controlled by CTM, which is a corrupt federation, labor federation, with links to the government. And they've crushed, murdered, killed trade unions who are independent. Now, what has happened in Ford, and maybe we can talk about that later, is that the Ford plant was led by a militant revolutionary group of workers. And the CIA with the AFL-CIO sent some goons in to attack the union. And this was organized in an attack that led to injuries of workers and the death of a Ford worker. And this murder is important to understand, because it's a concrete role of the AFL-CIO working with US multinationals to suppress workers who are organizing. And that was covered up. And but however, there's an important book which everyone should get called El Golpe, US Labor, the CIA, and the Coup at the Ford in Mexico by Rob McKenzie, which is about this, what happened at Ford in Mexico. And we at our organization are trying to raise that and support it. But one of the things that is going on now is that the United States, of course, supported NAFTA. And while the unions were opposed to it, and Clinton pushed it through with the support of the Republicans, and it privatized the wealth of Mexico. And much of the wealth of Mexico has been taken over by US billionaires, multinationals, the mines, the airlines, telecom. And this privatization of the wealth of Mexico is a policy of US imperialism supported by the AFL-CIO. And the recent US MCA, US Mexico Canadian trade agreement, was a continuation on steroids of the NAFTA. And although there was opposition to it in the unions, and it was fought for by Trump, the AFL-CIO supported, Trump got supported, and it was even brought up in the AFL-CIO Labor Council in San Francisco, and the bureaucrats attacked this guy, Alan Benjamin, who opposed it on the floor, and they pushed a pro-imperialist trade agreement. Now, what is going on in Mexico? Well, we've recently learned that the AFL-CIO is now spending $120 million in Mexico for democracy. And what does that mean? They've had some elections, and they did support the election of a union in Mexico, the General Motors workers, which was successful. It was an opposition union. And in fact, a previous speaker in this study group, David Bacon, in his report at this meeting, said that he wanted to go there and participate in the elections as an observer and to see that they were run properly. And he was prevented from doing that by the Mexican government. They wouldn't allow him to go to Mexico. Well, my view is it's a question. Do we want to be supported by the US government financially to go intervene in Mexico to make sure that the Mexicans have fair elections? It's a question, because the United States intentions, US imperialism intentions in Mexico is to, under the facade of democracy in the unions, is actually supporting pro-corporate unions in Mexico. They don't want left unions, communist unions, socialist unions, and it's part of US imperialism's policy. Another example of that in Mexico is the struggle of the farm workers, the Driscolls, where basically the ejidos were privatized under NAFTA. The indigenous people were forced out, came to the United States, these farm workers, and then were kicked back into Mexico. And now they're fighting for a union. And you have slave labor, $12 a day in Mexico. You have a very bad condition in the Baja. Now, the AFL-CIO is actively involved in Baja, supporting a union. There was a split in the union that doesn't want to talk about Driscolls or slave labor. So they're intervening in that situation, maybe doing good work talking about the conditions, but they really don't talk about US multinationals' role. And the other area is in Colombia, where the AFL-CIO Solidarity Center has an operation, doing supposedly good work, but they failed to report that the injured GM workers in Colombia and Bogota have had an encampment outside the Bogota embassy for 11 years fighting for their rights. That has never been reported by the Solidarity Center. So basically, I think our view is that the way to build solidarity with workers around the world is direct links by workers, auto workers with auto workers in Mexico and Brazil, and fighting these multinationals internationally. That is the way you fight for real solidarity, not by taking what is $75 million a year from the US government. We went to the AFL-CIO convention and passed out a flyer. We have a resolution, which I can put a link to. You can get it on our website, about calling for opening the books of the AFL-CIO, what they're really doing, and also rejecting the $75 million US funding of the international operations of the AFL-CIO. That is critical, because while they say that they're for an independent labor movement, you can't be for an independent labor movement when you're taking millions from the US government. In fact, the budget of the Solidarity Center is almost as large as the budget of the staff of the AFL-CIO. So here you have trade union federations whose budget for staff on its international operations is almost as large as its national budget, and it's funded by the US government. Why would this imperialist government fund the AFL-CIO if it was really fighting multinationals around the world? The reality, it is not, and that's why they continue to fund it. So what we are fighting for is opening the books. As I said, we're fighting for direct links with workers around the world, and one of the events that we're going to be having is on September the 11th. I'll put the link in. We're going to be having a panel on the Chilean coup, remembering September 11th, the coup in Chile, the role of the AFL-CIO, and also the role of the AFL-CIO in Mexico and Colombia. Frank Hammer is going to be speaking at that. So I think this is critical. I want to end by talking about the role of the AFL-CIO relationship to Israel, because there's been a fight to support Palestinian trade unionists and workers in Palestine. And the AFL-CIO, not only Richard Trumka, but Liz Schuler put out a bulletin saying you cannot discuss support for the Palestinian workers because they are against the boycott of Israel, and they are aligned with the HISTA group, the Israeli Trade Union Federation. So in San Francisco Labor Council, the bureaucrats use that cudgel to say we can't even discuss the issue of Palestine and Palestinian workers unless we get approval from the AFL-CIO. So the bureaucrats are crushing a debate even within the labor movement on these issues because they don't want this history and they don't want their real role to be exposed. And I think that that is a political task that workers, militants, trade unionists, socialists have to take up within the labor movement. And our organization is doing that. And we urge you to take a look at our website. And we are getting this website that we've developed actually covers countries all over the world, has articles. It's the portal, it's the main portal in the world to find out what the AFL-CIO is doing internationally. There's no other place where you can get all this information. And that in itself is a resource for working people in the United States and working people internationally. So that's my contribution. Thank you, brothers and sisters.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Steve. That was really, both of you, I mean, this is very thought-provoking and a very crucial kind of thing if we want to understand what's going on the world today and participate in these struggles. Let me very briefly before, and we'll turn to Q&A in just a few minutes, but let me, let's see here. Okay, here we are. Okay, in terms of future programs, we have next week is September 4th, which is the Labor Day weekend, and we will try to come up with something. We have some options we're exploring, but nothing definite. And September 11th, again, is the anniversary both of 2001 here in the United States, but the other one down in Chile, 1917. So that's also something we need to bear in mind. And September 18th, we have a talk by Michael Roberts, who has spoken here before, the British economist, and he will be talking on inflation, stagnation, and recessions, prospects for the US and world economy. So he will give us the bleak news on that, I think. And we're still trying to schedule the talk from Robert Orvetz on We the Elites, why the US Constitution serves the few. So we have some good programs coming up. And if you are not already on our mailing list, please go to, please sign up for it. You can go to icssmarks.org and sign up for our mailing list. So, and also, as always, we can use money. So Richard, are you on with us, and can you say something about that?
Yes, I will. I posted on the website, on the chat, some information on how you can contribute. That's for those of you who are on our live program. And for those of you who are viewing on YouTube, delayed, you should go to icssmarks.org, and there you will find information on a donate button, and I urge you to do that. It'll support both our work and the work of the Niebel Proctor Marxist Library, which is our physical home. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for your support. And back to you, Gene.
Okay, well, I'm sure we have a lot of questions. I know I have some comments, and we have a lot of others. So what I will do is keep a stack. And if you want to speak, there's a little button down at the bottom, reactions. And on that, there is a option to raise your hand. So raise your hand and I will keep a stack. And I will also try to keep an eye on the chat itself. So in case people want to get on the stack, you can put that in there also. I will try to keep checking that, but I'm not very good at that. So if people will remind me, we will put those people on the stack. And so again, we'll ask people to try to limit your talk to about 2 minutes. And we'll have comments by Kim and Steve, and also try to limit those so we get as much discussion going as possible. So right now I have Richard and Michael on the stack. And so is there anything else I need to say on this? No. Go ahead, Richard, and unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I thought it was very brief, and it was a good summary, a Cliff Notes version, if you will, of U.S. foreign policy and with regard to the AFL-CIO. I just wanted to a couple of points. I thought you sort of alluded to it. But I think one of the problems that went on in post-World War II was the purge of communist organizers, and in fact, it goes on today. You know, I know plenty of people who are organizing, who are members of either the CP or various allies, and when it comes to being promoted, they're not there. I think that needs to be brought up a little bit more, you know, a little bit more to date. The other thing I noticed is that I thought, Steve, that you sort of talked about the CIA and the National Endowment for Democracy as sort of the same thing. And I think that raises some interesting questions. I think it's more dangerous to do that, in part because the CIA is, at least by law, forbidden to operate on I think on U.S. territories, that they can only operate on foreign soils. I don't believe that the National Endowment for Democracy have those constraints. So that, for example, I believe they can be, that they can recruit people from the United States to operate against people in the United States. You know, I'm not sure on that, but my reading of the act is, it seems to indicate that. So I was wondering if you could comment a little bit on that, and also the NED has its method of operation is really it's really subtle, in the sense that they one of their things that they do is they go to universities and recruit out of universities for leadership. And that's when I said they can operate on our soils and then spread them around. And also, okay, I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Okay, Steve, but you have a comment on that, and Kim.
Well, I mean, the Solidarity Center is basically an appendage of the U.S. government. If you get a job with the Solidarity Center, you're basically working for the U.S. government. And when the operatives of the Solidarity Center in other countries work with the U.S. government, whether it's a labor attaches or the CIA in many other countries. So even though it says it's independent, in reality, it's in collusion with and Frank Hammer's brother, Mike Hammer, was in the AIFLD. That was before the National Endowment for Democracy, but he was working with the CIA and US government agencies. So I don't really see a big difference between, I mean, there's no big separation between the CIA and the National Endowment for Democracy in other countries. They work together. And they carry out the policies. The coup in Venezuela, and maybe Kim can talk about it, or coups in other countries, they work with the CIA in these coups. I mean, they collaborate. They're not they haven't, there's no real separation in other countries in relationship to coups organized by the United States, and the same as in Ukraine.
Yeah, I think that's basically true. They definitely work together. There's no question. I mean, the fact is, the distinction Richard was trying to make as far as the CIA working overseas and the NED could work at home, that's possible, but they both recruit out of universities. I mean, the CIA was full of Notre Dame graduates, for example. That's been documented again and again. I think the point is that there was a statement by one of the founders of the National Endowment for Democracy way back in 1991, and he admitted, we do overtly what the CIA used to do covertly. And so their operations are very similar. Where the point that I'm trying to make is that outside groups, whether the NED or the CIA, are not the ones that are creating labor's foreign policy. That's coming from within labor, in my opinion. And I think the overwhelming amount of research that's been done to date shows that. Now, Steve did talk about the 1991 coup at Ford in Rob McKenzie's new book, which I agree, by the way, is excellent. And it also shows how well people have been covering that up. And McKenzie did a great job in covering that. It's definitely worth it. It's from Pluto Press for about $20 or something. Definitely worth reading. Now, that's one case where the CIA was probably involved to a very great extent. But like I say, they've been working together throughout. They did it in Chile. They did it. They've done it. Did it in Brazil and Guatemala, but they've also done it in Venezuela, and they continue doing it today. So there's not, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of difference. The importance of understanding this, though, I think, is that if the AFL's leadership, their foreign policy leadership, is creating their foreign policy, that means that those of us in the unions have the chance to try to change that within the labor movement. Where if it's outside the labor movement, we have less of an ability to do that. So that's why I think this is important stuff. Okay,
excellent. And let me right now, next we have Michael Karsh, Carol Lang, and Sheila Hamanaka. And I'm going to put myself on the list because I have some comments here. So Michael, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, you said that with the National Endowment for Democracy, it's more of a gray area because what they did wasn't all bad. They've done some good things. I didn't think they ever did any good things. I just thought they were the CIA, only with a better name, because the CIA got such a bad rap. Another question, you talked about the labor struggles in Mexico, and the question I have is, has having AMLO as president changed any of that?
Well, I'll take the first half and let Steve have the second one on Mexico. I want to say, I didn't say that the National Endowment for Democracy was doing anything good. I'm saying that the Solidarity Center does at times act in ways that is at least not bad. So that's a solidarity center itself. Steve, you want to go ahead and talk about Mexico there?
Well, I think that AMLO has some independence from the United States, but AMLO supported USMCA. USMCA was a codification of imperialist trade policy in Mexico. It didn't stop nationalization. Now, he has said that he's against the nationalization of full nationalization of oil, but basically he's not challenging capitalist control. I mean, of the wealth of Mexico. The other thing that we have to be clear about in Mexico is that the process of quote unquote democratization is supporting unions similar to what we have in the United States. In my view, corporate unions, basically unions that, while they're more democratic than the CTM, don't challenge imperialism and don't challenge the capitalist parties. And that's what I feel is taking place. And they don't want militant class struggle unions that are anti-imperialist in Mexico. And that's, but they also don't want a revolutionary development in Mexico of militant class struggle unions that actually challenge the capital state in Mexico and US imperialism.
Okay, thank you. And we have an expanded list here. We have next is Carol Lang, followed by Sheila Hamanaka, followed by Jean Rule, followed by Roger Harris, followed by Frank Harmon, I believe.
Hammer.
So, and then Janet well, let me see here. Frank Hammer, Janet Corbin, and Ricardo. So, Carol.
Okay, one of the things that I think Steve didn't mention is that during the period when the AFL had its conference, we in LEPAIO had our own conference, and we were not too far away from where the AFL had their conference, and we had speakers who spoke about, I spoke about Israel. All of this is on our website, so you can go and see what people had to say. Frank talked about Mexico. Were lots and lots of different speakers that exposed what the AFL role in supporting American imperialism in all of these different countries. It's important for workers to know what their unions are up to, what the union leadership is up to, and Schuler is not going to allow it, and none of the rest of the trade union leaders are going to allow it. And so, you know, we hope that people will join with us to spread the word about what the AFL is up to, because it's supporting American imperialism and the overthrow of democratic governments and revolutionary governments around the world. You know, the one thing that we really try hard to expose is the Democratic Party and the relationship between the Democratic Party and the bureaucrats. And the bureaucrats are wholeheartedly behind the Democratic Party. I'm in the AFT and in the Professional Staff Congress in New York. And, you know, they talk about the Democrats that support the war and things like that as the bad Democrats, as opposed to understanding that the Democratic Party is the other side of the Republican Party. It's another, another arm of the bourgeoisie. And to make a distinction between the two is to lead workers into believing that if they just get a good AOC or Rashida Tlaib or any of those people in, you can fight the system. And what people in LEPAIO is saying is that you can't fight the system that way, because the Democratic Party is an arm of the bourgeoisie, and essentially the bureaucrats, you know, hide that fact and encourage us to support, you know, the Democratic Party, which we need to organize an independent labor party in the United States so that workers can have its own voice, our own voice. The last thing was that I was a little confused about, you know, about why we were talking about the CIA, as I forget who exactly mentioned it, that the CIA is not allowed to function inside the United States. Our point is, and I'll wrap up, is that the CIA is part of the CIA and the AFL are in, working collaboration to overthrow places outside governments, not work inside the United States, but to collaborate to overthrow governments, in Chile and places like that. And so, we're all Marxists, and we think ultimately that this has to go, that we need to get rid of capitalism, and, to set up a socialist society.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Go, Steve and Kim.
I don't have anything to say on right now. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I mean, there are differences in the LEPAIO about, politically what should be done. I mean, our major focus is a united front around the issue of the independence of the unions from US government and not supporting US imperialism abroad and opening the books. So but the fact of the matter is the Democrats and Republicans are part of the National Endowment for Democracy, as well as the Chamber of Commerce. I don't think a workers' government or a workers' party would be in favor of an alliance with the Chamber of Commerce, supported by the U.S. government. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce. See, this is one of the issues. The AFL-CIO, like privatization, they say they're against privatization. Actually, they're working for privatization around the world through the Solidarity Center. They support privatization, the market economy. They support a market economy around the world. That's the position of the Solidarity Center, which is the position of U.S. imperialism. The need for the independence of the unions in the United States and that don't support capitalist policies and don't support capitalism, not only here, but capitalism around the world is critical. You can't say that you're supporting workers in this country when you're supporting capitalist agendas, deregulation and privatization around the world, which is what the AFL-CIO has been doing in Ukraine and many other countries around the world, and supporting right-wing parties. I mean, they support the Liberal Democratic Party. The AFL-CIO has been silent about what's going on in Palestine, the attack on the Palestinians, complete silence. Most of the world unions have opposed the attack on the Palestinians, not the AFL-CIO. So they have an alliance with the HISTA group, which is a racist trade union federation. They have alliances with right-wing trade unions movements. The other thing is in the AFL-CIO, the Solidarity Center has had a lot of forums about Myanmar, supporting the workers of Myanmar, which I do. And Myanmar, by the way, is supported by Russia and China. But they call for a general strike here, but the rise of fascism in the United States they're silent about, or they say support the Democrats. That's how we'll fight fascism. Well, the Vermont AFL-CIO passed a resolution for general strike against a rise of fascism, against a coup in the United States, an insurrection. The AFL-CIO shut that down. Trumka ruled it out of order and threatened to put the Vermont AFL-CIO on trusteeship. So why would the AFL-CIO Solidarity Center be calling for a general strike, supporting a general strike in Myanmar and opposing action here in the United States against fascism, against a coup? It's because of the nature of the role that they play politically, internationally and in the United States.
Okay, thank you. And we're having a expanded list on our stack. We have Sheila Hamanako is next, and then Jean Rule, myself, Roger Harris, Frank Harmon, Ricardo, Raj, and Michael Kay again. So Sheila, can you unmute yourself if you're not already?
Yeah, thank you. By the way, thank you for this program. It's really, really excellent. Steve, you mentioned before that your program was taken off the air by the management, KPFA. And I'm a WBAI listener in New York City. And I don't know if people know this, but KPFA, the local station board and activists in KPFA are trying to get the FCC to rescind the license of WBAI, a Pacifica station, a sister station, to try and take us off the air. Now, I'm wondering if you could say something about the role of radio in with regard to these labor issues and what's going on in Pacifica, what's going to be the future of Pacifica, because the same New Day group that's trying to destroy WBAI has just managed to take over almost entirely the station at KPFA Houston.
Well, I mean, I would say that the cabal that run KPFA are, many of them are ex-members of the Communist Party. Maybe they're still in the Communist Party, some of them, but they're in the Wellstone Club, and they support they're against an activist station. They are appealing to the FCC to take over WBAI. They are putting on pro-imperialist programming. The news department at KPFA is basically Associated Press handouts, you know, on what's going on in Ukraine, and they want to be they want to support the Democratic Party. In fact, Philip Mulderry was a big supporter of Biden. He didn't support even Sanders, and then he says he's against Zionism. So, but you know, I think that Pacifica is a critical asset for the working class. It could be. There should be working class programming, but it's being purged, excuse me, by the people who run KPFA. We have to challenge that, and Pacifica Fight Back is doing that.
Okay, Kim, did you have more to add? Or?
No, I've not been involved. I've not been involved with any of these struggles, so I don't know anything about that. So,
okay, back to the stack, and I'm next on the stack, Jane. And I wanted to. Oops, let me get my timers. One of the areas that NED has been very involved with is, of course, China, and they supported the counter-revolutionary pro-democracy rioters in Hong Kong. And they've spent a lot of money on the so-called, I think, Free Labor Institute, I forget what it's called. But I think that doesn't take into account the actual nature of the labor movement in China. In particular, the largest trade union movement in the world is, of course, the All China Federation of Trade Unions, the ACFTU. It has 320 million members, I think, and many of us feel the most effective trade union in the world. But we have to understand that this goes back, was organized back in 1921 as an anti-imperialist, pro-communist movement, very closely tied to the Communist Party of China and deeply involved in the struggle for liberation and the entire liberation of China. So I think one needs to, and since that time, they have been very effective in terms of organizing workers, making sure that labor legislation is passed and so forth. And in our comrade Wadia Halabi's terms, they are a labor union risen to state power. And this gives them a totally different function in which they are helping to run the economy for the benefit of all workers, peasants, and everyone in China. So I think there's a totally different situation in China. And I think, and that has to do with the nature of Chinese society. And I know there are those in this room who may actually disagree with me on this, but I will ask Steve and Kim their thoughts on this matter.
Okay, I'll take a shot at it first. I mean, with the understanding that there's still a lot about China that I don't understand, but I think the similarities in China are very much to those how it used to be in the Soviet Union. Basically, and this will probably irritate, if not piss off some people, but I think they're largely a command chain for the Communist Party to dominate workers. I don't see them being a liberatory force. They're not, they're not supporting workers, and they're allowing it to go on, and they give legitimacy to the Communist Party in power. That's not to say that they're all evil. It's not to say that we can't talk to them or that workers shouldn't be talking to them and find ways to unite, but I do not see any way that they're a liberatory force. I don't see China as being quote unquote a communist society. I think it's basically got a capitalist system, and you know, that's what we're dealing with. Now, one place where the National Endowment for Democracy has been messing around in China is around the Uyghurs. I've not gotten into it too real deeply, but the evidence I've seen suggests that a lot of that is nothing but a propaganda campaign headed by a couple of people in Washington, D.C. that are very well connected, and that the claims by the West that they're committing genocide are just total nonsense. So in other words, I think that we need to look at China, we need to be aware of China, but I don't think there's any country that is all good or all bad, including our own. And I think we have to have some nuance and look at this critically. The National Endowment for Democracy, as far as I'm concerned, is pure evil. So where they go, I'm always skeptical. And it'd take a lot to convince me that they're not. But to me, see, the concept that I use, I didn't speak about it, but the concept I use is that of the US empire. So I argue that the US has an empire. So there's a distinction between the United States as a country and the US empire itself, which are parts of the world that the US wants to dominate. So the elites in our country try to make them sound like they're the same, and they're not. And I think we have to understand this. And so I argued that the US is trying to dominate the world. That's not a terribly profound statement. I think we'd probably all recognize that. But they're also empires. I mean, you know, certainly the Soviets had an empire in Eastern Europe. The Chinese are acting in that way as well. So I think that we've got to look at this with much more sophistication, and we need to keep that in mind. So that's what I would say. Okay, Steve.
Yes, I think, you know, our position, LEPAIO, is that we're against U.S. government funding and running, as an appendage, the international operations of the AFL-CIO. And one of the areas of that is that the politics of the AFL-CIO is supporting U.S. imperialism. It's supporting the surrounding of Russia. It's supporting the rounding of China. Is more militarization. Now, that is not a policy that is going to benefit the working class here or around the world. So we have to oppose in the unions the pro-imperialist policies. Whatever one position has on China or Russia, we have to oppose US military intervention around the world. That's a matter of principle. I mean, we have to support the working class here, and our main enemy is at home. The main enemy in working class is not abroad, it's right here in the United States. And that has to be our focus. Now, as to China, I defend China against the US encirclement, but China has played a pernicious role. For example, they supported the Pinochet government and supported the Chilean Pinochet government that was attacking the working class. They supported UNITA in Angola against the movement in South Africa. And they invaded Vietnam. They also support Israel. Now, the Chinese unions, which are an appendage of the Chinese Communist Party, they get money from the Chinese Communist Party, and there's an interchange, very close interchange between the unions in China and the government and the capitalists in China. They're not independent. The unions in China have no independence from the Chinese Communist Party. As a matter of fact, if you fight privatization in China, which is going on, the selling off of state assets, that becomes a political issue. The unions do not fight privatization because they're part of the state apparatus. They call themselves independent. In reality, they're an appendage of the Chinese Communist Party. And the conditions of the workers in China have improved, there's no question about it, with the economic development of China on the one hand. On the other hand, China is exporting capital all over the world. It's the largest exporter of capital in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And they are busting unions. They bust and we talked about in a previous meeting that you had, Piraeus. They attacked the union at Costco. They're attacking unions in Namibia, where they're firing union leaders in Namibian mines. They are attacking workers, and they have capitalist investment around the world, Chinese capitalist investment. Billionaires are buying up things. In fact, this strike that just happened in Felixstowe is owned by a Hutchinson, who's is a Chinese billionaire who lives in Hong Kong, who owns the ports in Hong Kong. And the workers there went on strike in 2003 against the 2013 against the its owner, who's a billionaire owner. So, what's happened in Hong Kong is they've destroyed pretty much all the independent unions, which means the billionaires, the Chinese billionaires who support the Chinese Communist Party are in charge. And they're using their power of the state apparatus to crush independent unions in Hong Kong.
Okay, thank you. And this is a topic which we have a diversity of views within our group, and we will return to this inevitably from time to time. And I see Roger Harris chuckling there, and you're up next, Roger. And
yes, thank you, Gene, and thank you, Steve and Kim, for very informative and interesting presentation. And particularly, Kim, I want to agree with you about the need for nuance. That not all countries are completely evil and completely bad. And I think particularly that becomes important in understanding the role of China, particularly in the area of my activism, which is Latin America. It's not bad that China sent vaccines to Venezuela. It's in fact the countries that are in the crosshairs of U.S. imperialism are now being supported by China. And one can argue quite strongly that their successes, insofar as they have been successful, is because of that support from China. And we can go into that more deeply. But for you, Kim, I would like to ask you a question more about Venezuela. Okay. Just incidentally, I'm with the Task Force on the Americas, and you traveled with us on a delegation to Venezuela in 2006, I believe. Can you tell us a little bit more about the role of the NED in the 2002 coup against the Bolivarian Revolution, and generally maybe comment on the fact that the labor union movement, major parts of it in Venezuela are actually anti-socialist, and that is not isolated, that there are other Latin American countries where we see the major labor federations playing an anti-socialist rather than socialist role. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
Kim, go ahead.
Okay. Well, thanks for your questions there. First of all, I was in Venezuela actually the same year in 2006, but I haven't been back there, and what I would say is the NED had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars supporting different organizations in Venezuela prior to the coup. What I was speaking on very specifically was that the AFL-CIO was supporting this. They had participated in meetings with the Catholic Church, right-wing labor unions, things such as this. And this gets to your question of nuance and stuff, because part of the thing is we tend to think, based on US experience, that there's a monolithic labor movement in every country. Now, the term that we use in international labor terminology that's not been adopted in the US, and I wish we would, is the term labor center. So, for example, some countries have one labor center, others have a multiplicity of labor centers. In the US, we only have one. That's basically the AFL-CIO. That, in international trade union terminology, that would be called a labor center. Now, other countries, such as the Philippines, which I'm most familiar with, have 5 different labor centers. And this is true in a number of countries in Latin America, and certainly true in Canada, and things like this. So you really can't talk of a monolithic labor movement. So what you see is different labor centers. So a labor center, by the way, I forgot to mention this, but a labor center being sort of a unifying group that has a number of unions that affiliated to that. All right, so you have multiple labor centers in a country. Some of them can be quite progressive and radical. Others can be quite reactionary. I mean, again, in the Philippines, the country I know the most about, is that they had a labor center created under Ferdinand Marcos by the Marcos administration. And they supported him, and they supported death squads against the more radical KMU, so that there's a range of politics within labor. There is not one unified labor movement, much less a working class, in my personal opinion. You have to look at it and try to understand each. So it's not surprising that there's a range of politics in probably any Latin American country. Unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish, and I've never studied Latin America in great depth. I have some familiarity, but it doesn't surprise me at all. And so like in Brazil, I know you have the CUT on one side, but you have other labor centers as well. And some of them can take quite reactionary positions. So that gets to that nuance that I think you suggested. In Venezuela, there have been efforts, and I'm not current on this, as far as trying to create militant unions that both support the Bolivarian Revolution as well as support their workers within that. And I think one of the interesting things that's happening in Venezuela is the creation of community councils that include workers as well as other people in the communities, in addition to the unions. We speak, I think we tend to speak of workers as being only limited, that their world's only limited to the unions, and I just have never found that. I find workers, like everybody else, usually have a multiplicity of connections, of ways to look at themselves and things like that. So a simple all workers are conscious of that and identify themselves through that, work through that, to me just doesn't make sense. So I hope this answers some of your questions or some of your efforts there, Roger. Thank you.
Okay, Steve, do you want to weigh in on this?
Well, I think what we're for the, again, I mean, our focus, we don't have a requirement that you have to take a position on other countries' labor movements. Our agreement is that we're opposed to our unions intervening to overturn unions in other countries and to set up pro-capitalist, pro-corporate unions. As I said earlier, what workers in this country should do is organize direct links with workers in Venezuela, workers in China, workers in every country. We're fighting the same capitalists and billionaires around the world. We need to, workers have to build an international working class movement. So one of the things about the left in this country is that a lot of left organizations talk about revolution or even supporting even supporting the Cubans, but they're not fighting in their own unions against the policy of the AFL-CIO to support sanctions and blockades against Cuba, against Venezuela. Our position is we're against all sanctions by the US government, which are acts of war against other countries, Iran. And those people in other organizations, I haven't seen it, for example, in the CWA, the left organizations, and there are many left organizations in the CWA fighting against the pro-imperialist policies of the CWA leadership. I don't see it. So like talk is cheap, frankly. And many leftists, quote unquote leftists, while they have positions, they're not fighting in their own unions against the union bureaucracy who support US imperialism around the world. And that has to change.
Okay, thank you. And next on the list, we have
yeah.
Next on the list, we have Frank
I
Hammer.
have computers, yeah.
Okay, can I finish here? Let me give the stack now. Frank Hammer, Ricardo, Raj, M. Keg, Norma Harrison, and Sharon Rose is our stack so far, plus two people that want to have second statements, Michael K. and Richard W.
I
So-
think you left me out.
Janet Coburn.
Say again?
Janet Coburn, she's up before Ricardo, I believe.
You are absolutely right.
Yeah, but
and I
not before
apologize.
Frank. Frank was sitting there with a tan hand that
Oh, oh.
couldn't be seen well.
Okay, well, let me get this right. Frank Hammer is next. And then Janet Corbin.
Okay, thank you. Can I do a time check? I don't know how long this meeting is supposed to last.
And that's a good point. This discussion is so fertile. I hope we can all fit it, but we normally end after 2 hours. And I don't know if other members of the committee that actually put the program on the air. If we can extend it a little bit, but not by much. So, and we need to come back and just talk more about this clearly. But let me go ahead and go ahead with Frank Hammer is next, right?
Yes, and I would make a recommendation, if I may, regarding procedure that let the folks who have their hands up make their comments and then come back to
That's
Steve.
all taken care of. Thank you.
Okay, good, okay.
Well, wait a minute. You're recommending that we just have a number of people make their comments.
Yeah, and then have Steve and Kim come back and respond.
Does that sound agreeable to everyone?
Gene, I think we have enough time. I think we best would be just go one by one.
Okay.
That way there's clarity.
Okay, well, you're the man, Raj. So
Got it.
yeah,
I'm good.
You'll be doing the recording, so
Okay.
and putting it on the web. So
Okay.
we'll continue with that and see
Okay.
how it works. We have a half hour left.
Okay, good.
So, but try to be cognizant of the passage of time. So Frank.
Yes, thank you. So I am Frank Hammer, and I'm a UAW GM retiree in Detroit, Michigan, and I was in the leadership of my local union, both as a bargaining chairman and as a president. I also served the International Union at the end of my career on the umpire staff of the GM department, and have been a labor activist to this moment right here. So my activism continues, and I wanted to say that LEPAIO, of which I'm also one of the founding members, is a very, very young organization. It was only earlier this year that we actually began to assemble this, and I think that we've done great work in the short amount of time that we've existed, and there's certainly as many viewpoints as there are in the direction of this. So with that in mind, I think what has united us is to reveal to certainly the US working class and globally that in the imperialist country, we have a union that is participating, or a federation that's participating in imperialism, and it's gotten very, very little exposure, as was already been said earlier in all the earlier conversations. And our role is to begin to assemble this information globally and to put it in a form that will be readily understandable and clear to working class in this country, to really understand, to reconceptualize their role in the labor movement and the role of the labor movement. So that's what I think our role, and we're doing a pretty good job so far. I like to think of what we're talking about with my intimate knowledge of UAW GM joint programs. And what we're seeing here with the Solidarity Center is just another joint program. And it's done with the capitalists, much in the same way that UAW members can recognize that we got company management and the union working together, and guess what? The management's got the upper hand in 90% of the cases in whatever gets decided. And this is very much the role of the Solidarity Center, that it's a junior partner to the engagement of U.S. imperialism abroad, and indeed gets its funding from its partner. And it's, I think, readily understandable to workers that if you're a union and you're in the pay of management, that it's not going to work out real good for you. And people will understand.
That's 2.5. That's almost 3 minutes now.
And we can extend that. The difficult challenge is, of course, to overcome the nationalism that is inbred in so many working class elements, to recognize that they have more in concert with Mexican workers than they do with management. So that's that. And I just wanted to mention Rob McKenzie's book was referenced earlier, and I think what's really most illustrative of that book is what it took for him in the last 5 years to get the information that he was able to get. Never mind all the information that he has still not been able to get. So the concealment of these operations is what's critical for LEPAIO and for the work that we're doing. And I want to add, and I want to go back to Steve mentioned earlier. So my brother was employed by the American Institute.
Hey, please bring it to an end quickly. You're about 4 minutes already.
Okay. Okay. My brother, in his capacity of A field in El Salvador, it was very clear to investigating all that work that he was the soft element of what the U.S. role was doing, and the hard role was being paid by all the military that were doing these massive genocidal attacks in the middle of a land reform program. Both take place both at the same time, and I think we witnessed that in Ukraine. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Steve and Kim.
I'll pass.
Steve. You're muted, Steve.
I'll pass.
Okay, well, we'll move forward then. I believe Janet Corbin is next, then Ricardo, Raj, MKeg, Norma, Sharon, and then we have people who are on for the second time. But go ahead, Janet.
Yes, hi, it's Coburn.
Sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to raise something about a domestic issue involving New York City municipal unions. The New York City United Federation of Teachers Local of the AFT is the largest local, I believe, in the country. The UFT Unity slate, originally led by the late Social Democrat Albert Shanker, has controlled the New York City Teachers Union for decades. I was a UFT member and even served as a chapter leader, UFT's equivalent of a shop steward, for a few years, worked in the New York City High School Division and retired in 1998. One of the benefits of being a New York City retiree is that your health insurance premiums are free. The retirees chapter of the UFT, by the way, has a section in Israel. Anyway, back in 2018, the UFT raided a dedicated retiree health fund that was to fund, in order to fund teachers' raises. Some other New York City municipal unions did so as well, with the city's blessing, leading to a $600 million budget deficit. Then in 2021, the Municipal Labor Committee, MLC, which consists of the UFT and I believe 100 more other New York City municipal unions, negotiated on behalf of over 250,000 municipal retirees with the New York City management to force all retirees to be put on a Medicare Advantage plan and charged a $200 per month penalty to remain on traditional Medicare in order to pay for the budget deficit. So this was off the backs of its vulnerable retirees whose work life has ended. And the thing is that the municipal retirees were not represented in these negotiations because legally, once a New York City municipal worker retires, they are no longer union members. This caused the retirees to sour on their former unions. So a group called the New York City Organization of Public Service Retirees was formed. It's not a union and has almost 17,000 members and they got these members without access to retirees lists. These New York City retirees sued New York City. The judge who recognized the organization as representing all New York City retirees.
That's almost 3 minutes, Jen.
Okay, I'm almost done. Ruled against the city in this case, and the scheme was put to stop the insurance company, eventually pulled out. New York City appealed the case and it will be heard in October. And the city is now scheming to eliminate Medicare for its retirees altogether. And there's a UFT faction that is in the minority that supports the New York City retiree lawsuit. I just wanted to inform everybody of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. And comments from Kim or Steve?
I would say that the collaboration by the union bureaucrats with the state is pernicious and destructive of working class interests.
The city.
In fact, you know, they're private insurance company boards, Blue Cross and others, that union officials are on. And that's why they're opposed to single payer or national health care, because they get benefits. They get financial incentives from these insurance companies. So it's a pro-capitalist system. And they're at the same time, I did want to mention that, you know, while they're providing, the United States is increasing the budget in Mexico, $120 million. They've cut back funding, or they haven't increased funding at the NLRB so that workers who want union elections are able to get them. So the AFL-CIO union bureaucracy doesn't want to fight the capitalists, is in collusion with the insurance companies. And in this case, it means that workers are losing their benefits and conditions, and retired workers particularly. So I solidarize with those workers in New York City and other places that are fighting deals that their union leaders are making with the bosses.
Thank you.
Okay, and as a retired member myself with the California Faculty Association, I'll just say that things seem to work out differently here in California, but we don't need to go into that. But thank you so much, Sharon. Janet. I'm sorry. We have Ricardo next, I believe.
Yes. So a couple of things I want to say, as for example, Mr. Scipes have said that the U.S. acts like an empire, wants to be an empire. The United States is an empire, and it has colonies. And one of the first places that the FAL and Sam Gompers went to influence politics was to Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. You know, Sam Gompers went over there to, and tried to prevent the labor movement to establish a workers' party, and he was not successful. People, the Federación Libre de Trabajadores and the Socialist Party, which was a reformist party, established a workers' party and competed in elections. And he didn't agree with that, but people did it, opposed that. And he supported the colonial policies against the working class in Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. And he did that. And it's evidence that he traveled there to try to do that. And actually, one of the few places that he was embarrassed was in Puerto Rico, because it was revealed that Gompers, had supported racist policies. And he was denounced that he had to travel over there and, make stupid apologies and stuff of statements that he had made in the United States, and his policies in the unions. So that is a fact. And the AFL-CIO in Puerto Rico, they supported the United States combating the independence movement and the Communist Party. Actually, in the 1940s, the Communist Party of Puerto Rico had organized La Central General de Trabajadores, led by Juan Sáez Corrales. And the AFL-CIO, with the support of the colonial government and the United States imperialism, went over there to divide the workers' movement, to organize on their own right, and distribute anti-communist pamphlets and propaganda among the working class to oppose independence fighters, the call for independence and for socialism. Actually, I have a labor studies, a bachelor's degree from the University of Puerto Rico, and I have studied these issues, and the AFL-CIO had these centers of education where they produce propaganda telling workers oppose communist organizers in the working class. I just wanna, put that out, because the question of colonialism in Puerto Rico sometimes is left behind by so-called activists. And one thing is,
Okay, that's
Gina,
almost 3 minutes.
can I have 30 more seconds to say one thing?
You got it. 30
okay.
seconds.
We cannot be naive about the CIA not doing constrained by law of domestic spying. The CIA have done domestic spying in the United States. And actually during the 60s, they did perform Operation Chaos, which they spied as many as 7,000 Americans, according to the American Civil Liberties Union. And still right now, it has a participation in a so-called FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. And through that task force, they collect information of people in the United States. And if you want to, I want to end it right here. I will respect the time's constraints. And I want people to read the article by the SCLU, more about intelligence agencies, CIA, DNI spying. You can Google that and you will see what I'm talking about. They
Okay,
do
thank you,
conduct.
Ricardo. Over
You're
to
welcome.
Steve and Kim.
Okay, thank you, Ricardo. All right, first of all, I think you're absolutely right. Colonialism is certainly ongoing, and it's certainly continued in Puerto Rico as well as the Philippines since 1898. There's no question in my mind on that. I have studied the Philippines. I have not studied Puerto Rico in the depth it sounds like you have, and I'd welcome your knowledge. Now, my understanding is that Gompers, at least his first trip to Puerto Rico, was asked by Puerto Rican workers to come there. But I have no doubt that his view was very different than that of the Puerto Rican workers, and he worked against it. I just haven't studied that, although Steve Zeltzer did mention Puerto Rico when he spoke. But in the US, the term US empire has not been adopted even by the left. Very, very few people use that term. And I think it's an important term. I have no doubt that that the US is an imperialist country and that it has colonized Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Guam, and other countries as well. So I appreciate your focusing on that. Again, my apologies. There's a problem of how do you learn about everything? Despite my best efforts, I haven't been able to do that. But I totally am in agreement with your comments, and I thank you for them. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Ricardo. I mean, one of the, again, facts about the left in this country is the failure to take up the role of labor imperialism in Puerto Rico. It's not just Gompers. The AFT has raided unions in Puerto Rico. The teachers union supported charters. The SEIU under Sweeney sent Andy Stern to Puerto Rico, who made a deal with the Democratic governor to privatize the national health care of Puerto Rico. And in return, their SEIU members worked at Amana and other private companies. So they privatized the healthcare system in Puerto Rico. The IBW was involved in a raid in Puerto Rico. So the role of these US union bureaucrats, the leaders of these international unions, is to direct agents of US imperialism. What business do American unions have raiding Puerto Rico unions and trying to set up US subsidiaries of US unions? It's called labor imperialism. And none of the left that I see challenge it in their unions. Gloria La Riva, many, they don't raise the issue of US labor imperialism in their own unions. So it's not going to become an issue unless trade unionists raise it in their unions and say it has to end. We have no business setting up U.S. Unions in other countries against the wishes of the workers in those countries. And we're spending millions of dollars. The AFT was spent millions of dollars rating the teachers in Puerto Rico and supporting privatization in Puerto Rico, charters. They support charters here, the AFT and the NEA. So they're actually bringing about destructive pro-capitalist conditions in Puerto Rico and in other countries by the policies they have.
Gene, who's up next?
I think it's me.
Okay, Raj, go ahead.
Maybe I should go ahead. Okay, I appreciate the presentation and discussion. And I suggest we keep recording all the way to 1 o'clock. And then when we meet tomorrow, we can decide how much to put it up on YouTube. So having said that, couple of observations and then therefore questions arising from there. First of all, is that unions are have a limited role to play in society. Okay, unions basically are designed to protect workers' interest against the capitalist class, right? They are not a revolutionary organization per se. There may be some unions that become revolutionary, but general character of a union is to argue for the best wages and best working condition. In other words, share of the work they do that capitalists retain for themselves as profit, reduce it, and that's their prime role. So the idea that struggle against this imperialism's support by unions is very legitimate struggle and should support it, absolutely. But here's the problem, that is unions by very definitions, union workers, today there are only 9% of US workers are unionized, okay? But union workers are still the workers that, because of their organization, get higher wages, generally speaking, okay? So they become tied to the system, okay? That's one thing. How do you break from that? So that's the question. And secondly, the relationship with third world, where imperialism actually sucks off additional profits from low-wage workers into the United States, and some of it is funneled back into the welfare of the workers, what Lenin called bribe, okay? It's of course not given to all the workers, it's to a limited number of workers, and usually these are the trade unions which are most in strategic industries that get the most of the bribe. So the strategy to fight these two is very difficult. And third, US workers are pitted against Chinese workers, okay? Chinese workers have lower wage, and then there are Indian workers below that and other workers. So the question I have for the two speakers is, what would form the basis of unity of workers in this case? How will you arrive at that, if you have any thoughts? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going and Steve, go ahead.
Okay, let me speak to that because I've done a lot of work on that. First of all, your limitation of unions only to be tools to improve workers' lives is only one conceptualization of trade unionism. One of the things that we saw happening globally in the 1970s were labor centers in 3 different countries, Brazil, the Philippines, and South Africa, that created an entirely new type of trade unionism. And that type has been labeled social movement unionism. Now, we have to be careful because Kim Moody of Labor Notes screwed that up and applied that understanding to the United States. And Kim Moody, in my opinion, which I've argued for years, is wrong. Because basically, these unions in, like I say, Brazil, the Philippines, and South Africa, that they understood that they not only had to challenge the capitalists in their countries, but they had to include in their challenge their country's placement in the global economic order that the U.S. has established. So that they are in, and so I can speak particularly on the KMU of the Philippines, which I've made 9 trips out there. I've written a book on the KMU. This stuff, you know, I'm very much in depth, and they see themselves as an anti-imperialist labor movement, labor center, excuse me. And for example, every year they invite workers and union leaders to come to the Philippines for a 10-day program around May Day to come to understand, to examine the situation of Filipino workers and what they could do. This to me is, as far as I can tell, is the only project like this in the world, but it's a terribly important one. So they see themselves united with workers around the world, and in fact, there's a whole global organization. It's called Southern Initiative, SIGTUR, SIGTUR. It stands for Southern Initiative on Trade Union Rights, and this includes labor movements from labor centers from South Africa, from India, from the Philippines. It includes some in Brazil and Argentina as well, as and there are several other unions collaborating with us. There's a lot of stuff that is happening in the so-called third world or the global South that we could learn from in the United States, and most Americans have no idea this. So for example, I argue that the KMU is the most developed labor movement in the world, yet people just don't know about this. And I'll put the link up, but my book on the KMU is now online for free to anybody that wants to download and read it. It's a little dated. I published in 1996, but unfortunately it's held very true to this day. But there's a lot we can learn from these other labor movements. COSATU in South Africa, CUT in Brazil, at one time were both practicing this new social movement unionism. But also my latest book, which is it's only been out in hardback, and as much as I value my own working, I could never ask people to pay $120 for a book of my stuff. But it's coming out in paperback in September. It's called Building Global Labor Solidarity: Lessons from the Philippines, South Africa, Northwestern Europe, and the United States. And I in there, and I'll put up the discount code so everybody can get a 30% discount on this puppy, should you be interested. It'll be out, like I say, in September. This talks about this type of social movement unionism in detail. So there are different ways of creating unions. The American way the US way is not the only way to see this. And in fact, it's a very limited view. And then when you see that most of it's a very conservative, if not reactionary union view, you want to find other examples for that. So I'm going to step away from him for a minute. I'll let Steve go on if he wants to, but I think what we have to do is recognize there are people around the world and unions and labor centers around the world that are far ahead of us, and it can show us some things. We've just got to drop our arrogance and be willing to look for other examples. Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think that the U.S. workers, the idea that U.S. workers benefit from U.S. imperialism is a reactionary idea, actually. And there is a labor aristocracy in the AFL-CIO. They make hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're corrupt, and they support U.S. imperialism, capitalism. But the ideology that U.S. workers benefit from imperialism is a reactionary idea. In fact, what we're going towards is imperialist war.
Steve, I didn't say they benefit as a whole.
You're interrupting me. What we're going towards is an imperialist war, which is going to mean the destruction of millions of workers and people all over the world. That's not going to benefit U.S. workers. U.S. imperialism is in decline in the United States, and that's why it's becoming more and more adventurous. And the struggle in the United States and the political vacuum that we face is that we don't have a working class political alternative. And I believe personally, it's not the position of LEPAIO, that the workers need to have their own democratic mass workers' party with a program for the working class. We can't rely on the Democratic Party. And that, that would have a program for the workers to control industries, would have a program for the climate, for energy, for healthcare, against COVID. It's not going to be solved by the Democratic Party. Capitalist ideology in the unions is that the Democrats in the United States, the Democrats will solve our problem. We don't have to fight fascism by organizing self-defense and organizing the working class. We can support the Democrats. The social crisis and political crisis, not just in the United States, but all over the world, requires a political working class solution. In South Africa, there's a struggle now about how to build a mass workers' democratic party. There was just a general strike on Wednesday, and that's a pressing question. How is the working class going to organize itself, not only through unions, but through a political expression, a working class political expression? What workers can do in this country is to unite directly with workers in the rest of the world fighting the same capitalist class globally. There is a capitalist class globally that pits workers in this country against workers in China, that pits workers against workers in Mexico or workers in Japan or workers in Russia. We have to fight that racist nationalist ideology that dominates the trade unions in this country. That's why the AFL-CIO is supporting sanctions. The AFL-CIO leadership is supporting imperialist war, which is to the detriment of US workers in this country. So we have to unite workers on a class basis in this country and internationally. The first step in doing that is one of the first steps is to expose the fact that our union leadership are supporting US imperialism as abroad, supporting anti-labor, anti-working class intervention abroad, and we have to end that. And we'll end that in part by exposing what its history is, what its role is. What happened in Chile is a crime. The AFL-CIO have blood on their hands in Chile. They're responsible for supporting the death of thousands of workers and the destruction of unions, the destruction of left organizations and democratic rights. The AFL-CIO has never been held accountable for that. We need to this year we're having a meeting on September 11th. Next year we need meetings all over the country on what happened in Chile. The September 11th that the United States and the AFL-CIO were involved in destroying and attacking the working class in Chile. We have to bring that home to American workers and link up with the workers in Chile.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And we have the permission of Raj to keep recording until 1 o'clock. So, and we will deal with that later. But so we'll keep on going until 1. I have M. Keg, I think.
Mike,
and
thanks very much.
Mike, Norma, Sharon Rose, and then Michael Karsh and Richard Wright on our list. So go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, one of the interesting things for me sitting over here in Boston in the UK is that I never fully understand the topic that's under discussion, and it's always very exciting as I sort of hear the speakers talk about their issues, and I find myself nodding, frantically in agreement. It's really depressing that you've got a trade union body that essentially colludes with US economic imperialism, both at home and abroad. I mean, that's absolutely appalling. Our trade unions and our Labour government, Labour Party over here are kind of moving to what they call the centre ground, which feels to me like pretty much the same sort of process going on in this country. And they clearly do it, as you've described, by encouraging countries to go private with their public services and things of that sort, and that enables American corporations to kind of move in. I mean, for me, I think the last speaker, Steve, has just made the point about the lack of a workers' party in America. And we did have the Labour Party established at the turn of the 20th century, which did achieve quite a lot just after the Second World War, which benefited ordinary working people. But in America, you've never really enjoyed that opportunity. And one of the things that I think, and again, this is maybe a bit on the radical side, is that it's not necessarily the existence of parties which are the problem in the West, in America and in the UK. It's largely the problem of the 18th century binary political system that we operate within, which was set up to encourage unfairness, elitism, and inequality, and has been doing that very successfully for the last 200 years, or 300 years. So the possibility of establishing a wide-based workers' party and genuinely finding ourselves benefiting from a bottom-up political system seem many light years away. And I just wonder if the speakers could address that point. You know, it's one thing to have a workers' party. It's another thing to sort of change the nature of the system to try and bring that reality about. Thank you.
Okay, our speakers.
Steve, you want to take a go at that?
Well, I think that, you know, I don't agree that we shouldn't have a political party of the working class. I mean, that was one of Marx's struggles to form the British Labour Party. So the working class have a political program and a political independence from the capitalist class. The capitalists have their parties. And in the United States, it's the Democrats and Republicans. So I think, but there is a political vacuum now, not just in the United States, but many other countries, that the working class is not independent politically, or the parties that are social democratic and they're social democratic parties are actually carrying out the policies of capitalism and imperialism.
Yeah, it is.
What the Labor Party is doing. So, I mean, I think that one of the struggles in the AFL-CIO is against support for the Democrats and for a working class party. In the UAW, that is not an issue. It should be, but there's having an election, is the formation of a workers' party so that they have a party that's going to represent them. And I think
I agree.
That's what's necessary in the United States. Just a debate about the need for political independence from the capitalist parties is a critical thing.
But if I could just come back, I mean, I think the point I was trying to make was that the system itself tends to militate against the creation of a working class party. The fact that you have a top-down bourgeois attack and defend political system, as we have in this country, means that the new parties find it very difficult to get themselves established, because the mechanisms all work on a top-down elitist kind of formula. Which
I would say that the unions in Britain have supported the Labour Party, and if there's a struggle in the unions to form a new party, it could happen. And a number of unions have broken from the Labour Party in Britain, but there's no formation of an independent workers' party. But the working class and the unions have the power to form their own political party if they want to do that.
You wouldn't get anywhere, though. That's because the system wouldn't allow it to do that.
Well, I think the movement for a general strike in Britain now would offer the possibility of not only bringing down the British Tories, but forming a workers' party. So you're not relying on the social democrats that lead the Labour Party, anti-communist, pro-Zionist social democrats who lead the Labour Party. So I see the struggle for a workers' party tied to the actual class struggle and fight against the capitalist class. And the movement now in Britain and growing around the world is that capitalism is destroying the working class and destruction. So they have to fight, whether they want to or not. And the strikes that are breaking out throughout Britain now are rising to crescendo that may lead to a general strike. A general strike that brings down the government without a political alternative can't go very far. There has to be a political alternative for the working class, in my view.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that.
Okay, let's let Kim respond and move forward.
No, I really didn't have a whole lot to say on that. I mean, I think there's more room for unions to take independent positions in Britain than there is in the U.S. But I think that the thing that we talk about in LEPAIO and stuff is that if nothing else, unions should not be collaborating to oppress other workers around the world. And I want to speak real quickly to a comment that Raj put in the chat. I disagree with is that I just spoke about how workers that they're workers in the so-called third world or global south, or whatever term you want to use. They're actually victims of colonialism that are trying to create union movements and labor centers that we can work with in the US, but most Americans don't know anything about them. And there's actually a lot going on, and we need to be looking for this. Because I definitely think that's what has to be done, and that we have to build global labor solidarity. But included in this is that we've got to stop the labor imperialism of the AFL-CIO. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me go back to our list, our stack. We have Norma Harrison.
Okay, I'm
Sheila
ready.
Rose, Michael Karsh, Richard Wright, Sheila Amanaka, and Ricardo on the list, on the stack.
Okay,
So
I'm
go ahead,
ready.
Norma.
I want to go to the area of the discussion where people were railing against the efforts that the owning class does against the rest of us, as you know, because that somehow comes out of sight when people are talking about the failures of the attempt, or calling them failures of the attempts of nations to establish communism. So nations fight like crazy to establish a communist going of their country. They have wars, they have deaths, they have mass murders, as we saw with World War II, of the populace that is committed to forming a social structure that will belong to the people, you know, the dictatorship of the proletariat. And the imperium, which is evident, you know, it shows itself all the time. For 110 years, of course, has been attacking the Bolshevik revolution, regardless its status. And the evidence, of course, is the movement against Ukraine, because Russia got fed up with the constant attack against it that's been going on, its border countries having been taken over, attacked and invaded by NATO, the arm of the US hegemony. So the thing is that, you know, Stalin was made into a monster. How did that happen? Well, he fought like crazy to defend the revolution. And it's very oppressive to have to fit in to a socialist structure where all the people are going to take care of all the people. People cannot fathom it. You know, the mantra that people can more easily imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Well, that's what's going on. And it's going on in every element of work that is being done on either side. On the side of the people opposing and creating Stalin into a monster, trying like crazy to create Xi into that kind of monster. Even though they failed. I love it. They couldn't do it because of all the people now being taken care of.
You're pushing 3 minutes.
That's good for me and for everybody else. I'm wondering if you get my point. I posted a note in the chat that Tiananmen Square was, the reporting on it was a myth. Which might help you understand what actually is going on among the populace. Okay, I could go on for more.
Okay, let's switch to our panelists and see if they have comments on this.
Okay, I mean, you know, there's no question that the elites in this country, whether you call them a ruling class or whatever, are opposed to any type of social recreation of their societies or things like that.
Uniting with elites from everywhere.
I'm sorry?
Uniting.
Yeah,
with the elites.
I mean, this is we know this. I mean, I don't think it's even worth bringing up. But personally, the thing is, wait a minute. What we're arguing is that the labor movement should not be operating in the same way. That the AFL-CIO leadership is undercutting every conception of union solidarity, of working solidarity that there is. I mean, that's clear. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to, I mean, we can argue that there has to be a more nuanced look at Stalin than they have, but Stalin was not Stalin was not a Democrat. Stalin also betrayed the communist movement by uniting with Hitler and things like that. So I wouldn't go very far with Stalin on that. Looking at efforts such as in Venezuela to create a socialism, an alternative society for the 21st century, I think is much more useful. And I think going back and debating those old issues, or that the left even worries about this, I think does not offer us a way forward. Certainly younger people. I mean, I've been teaching at the university for 18 years. I'm teaching my 19th year. Young people don't give a shit about this stuff, you know, and we on the left have failed to be able to convince them that these are real issues and things such as this. But going back and arguing for the Soviet model or Eastern European model, I think is a just, I mean, yes, we need to understand them better. And in fact, right now I'm working on a book. I'm going to show that no, the Cold War was not started by the Soviet Union. It was started by the US and the UK, although they blame the Soviet Union. So we've got to take a much more nuanced view, but it's not all good. Just like any place else is not all bad. And we've got to have some nuance, and we've got to be able to use it today for going forward, not just looking back at the past. We have to learn from the past. I don't think we have to be submerged to it. So,
okay, Steve.
Well, I would say that, you know, the internationalism, the only solution for the working class is internationalism and fighting globally for workers to run the world. And that means fighting the multinationals and the billionaires in China, the billionaires in the United States, the billionaires in Russia. It's a global struggle of the working class, and the rise of nationalism and xenophobia and racism is a result of the crisis of capitalism. We now have an inter-imperialist rivalry with the declining US imperialism that is going towards world war. The solution is for the working class in this country to join with the workers in India, the workers in Russia, the workers in Ukraine, the workers around the world against imperialism, against US imperialism. The main threat to world war is the United States. And what we're saying in LEPAIO is American workers and their unions have to confront the fact that the US unions are supporting this drive towards world war. The US unions are supporting the encirclement of Russia and China. The US unions are supporting the sanctions and blockades of Cuba, of Venezuela, of Iran. We have to oppose that, and we have to educate workers and young workers. We cannot support militarization. Our main enemy is the capitalists here in this country. That has to be our focus and the reasons why they are the main enemies.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move forward. We have Sharon, Michael K., Richard W., Sheila Hamanaka, and Ricardo on the stack. Sharon, please go. And we have 15 minutes before we all turn into pumpkins. So Sharon, go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to make 2 points. I agree with Steve that the enemy of the U.S. working class is the U.S. ruling class, and it's our job to educate our working class in all the ways that he spoke about. But then what you have done, what you turn around and do, Steve, is you opine sweepingly about a so-called Chinese empire. And I think that needs to be dropped from any of the propaganda that LEPAIO is producing, and you ought to refocus your efforts toward the U.S. working class and our main enemy. But I wanted to mention that you did not, in your presentations, you did not mention immigration reform as an issue here that the U.S. working class should be addressing. And of course, this overlap between domestic policy and international policy. But you know, for the 12 million people who are living here who are undocumented in various ways or in danger of being deported, the policy of our trade union federation is abominable, and I think criticism of their, international policies should include trying to educate American workers about the need for a pathway to citizenship for all the people who have been pushed out of their own countries by U.S. imperialism and drawn here by U.S. capital. Thank you.
Okay, comments from Steve and Kim?
Steve, you want to take that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a result of U.S. imperialism that we have the immigration crisis. U.S. invasions of the Philippines led to Filipinos coming to the United States. U.S. invasions of Central America led to people from Central America coming to the United States. The destruction of the economies in these countries by U.S. imperialism led to workers being forced off the land. I mentioned earlier about what's happened to the privatization of ejidos in Mexico by U.S. imperialism through NAFTA, forcing the indigenous people, the farmers, off the land into the United States, where they're attacked and blamed for the crisis. They're forced back into Mexico. And there is a reactionary bill that's in Congress now to basically further enslave guest workers who come from Mexico, which unfortunately the Farm Workers Union is supporting. Electronic Verify. There's going to be a rally, I think, this Thursday at 333 Bush to oppose that. But
no, it's tomorrow.
It's tomorrow. Okay, yeah. So, I mean, we need to, maybe you can put that in the chat. We need to organize with workers, immigrants. The problem is not immigrants. We have to say that every worker in this country has a right to democratic rights and union rights. And we have to oppose the Democrats and Republicans who incarcerate these people. There are more arrests under Obama and expulsions than under previous governments. So it's a bipartisan policy. The Democrats and Republicans have a anti-immigrant policy when it suits them. And they're blaming immigrants for this crisis. And that's what Biden is doing, So as far as LEPAIO is, as I said, not taking a position on the nature of China, the nature of Russia, the nature of Venezuela, the nature of Cuba. LEPAIO is saying we, American workers, have to oppose the pro-imperialist policies of the AFL-CIO. We have to oppose the sanctions and boycotts. We have to call for the independence of the unions from government funding in the United States. It's a united front around those issues. So within LEPAIO, there are different points of view. But our main responsibility here as American workers is to fight for the unions to support the working class here and support the working class around the world, not collaborate with the US government.
Gene, you're muted.
I'm finished. That's
okay. I apologize. I was muted. So I'm back. Okay, moving forward, we have Michael K. and Richard W., Sheila Hamanaka, and Ricardo. So
can I make a suggestion that people get a chance to finish what they want to say, and then Steve and Kim can summarize at the end, because otherwise they're not going to get a chance. We have 10 minutes left.
That's right. So, so we'll have we'll end the stack. Please try to keep your comments to 2 minutes, and then we'll go to Steve. And does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that comment. Okay. So go ahead with this in mind. Who is next? Michael K.
Yeah. Well, first question I have is, when did the Solidarity Center do something that was not bad? Give me an example of that. And second, you just said Stalin united with Hitler. I thought Stalin did the most to defeat Hitler, far more than we ever did.
Okay, thank you. Moving forward to Richard W. Richard W.
I'm getting there.
Right.
So I've been involved in this thing for a very, very, very long time. My question is, I've been involved in the union. I've been very active anti-imperialism in the union. at one point I spoke up at the General Assembly when they were passing out American flags. Because of I spoke up in favor of supporting the Japanese workers, in support of the Japanese workers back when there was this big movement against the Japanese. Yesterday, I was in my General Assembly caucus, listening to my brothers and sisters talking about how they can support the Democratic Party. What can we do within our unions to get beyond the union bureaucrats? Thank you.
Okay, moving forward, Sheila Hamanaka.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to know what you think the left should do to fight racism, and the labor movement, the left, the labor movement, LEPAIO, and even this organization, the library, because as we can all see, if we're on camera, the left is segregated, and this meeting is predominantly older white people. Even though there are numbers of Black Marxists and of other nationalities and ethnicities and nations within the United States. That's my question.
Okay, thank you. And moving forward to our stack, Ricardo.
Yeah, very shortly. Kim, you're right that the first meeting that happened, Santiago Iglesias Pantini invited Gompers. But what I'm saying is that he immediately got into trouble with even his own allies, and ultimately he played that role of anti-communism, and he was, despised, Samuel Gompers, and his agenda failed. And, it was one agenda of attacking revolutionary nationalists and the Communist Party of Puerto Rico. On the other hand, right quick, because I'm aware of the time, one thing that has left out of this conversation is the Democratic Party, that the need that we have to build an independent workers' party, because, voting for the Democrats, which the Democratic Party is the oldest capitalist party in the world, is not going to lead us anywhere, have led us nowhere. And, capitalist, pro-imperialist politicians will never do anything for the working class in the highest stage of the capitalist imperialist era. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, we have about 6 minutes left on the recording, and we'll give those 6 minutes to Steve.
I have a last moment comment.
I think everybody has had their chance, Norma.
I know, but this is one sentence.
Give your sentence and then we'll move forward quickly.
Yeah. The mansplain dismissal of what I put out here is not unfamiliar to us. We are dealing with a millennia-old slave mentality. Look, even at Cuba, the change necessary doesn't come overnight just because somebody says to, especially under the despotic totalitarian autocracy, the US hegemony.
Thank you, Norman. Now, Steve and Kim, the rest of the time is yours. So it's yours. Go ahead.
Okay, I guess I'll go ahead and start. I'll take a few of the things that I can speak on intelligently. Somebody, let's see, it was Michael asked for example of the Solidarity Center doing at least not bad work. They have supported some particular union struggles. In fact, they were involved in this recent victory at Silao with the GM workers in Silao. Now the question is why they were doing it. I don't think it was for the good of Mexican workers. I think the elites are terribly scared of immigration, that they want to stop it. The only way they're going to stop it is to promote economic development in Mexico. And what they want to do is to make sure that they can control any union. So I think that's why the Solidarity Center is getting there. But it is a more sophisticated type of situation than that that we have to look at. It's not like the old days where everything the institutes did was bad. Let's see. Sheila raised the issue of racism in the left. I think that's an ongoing problem. We're not going to face it. I've been consciously working for 50 years challenging white supremacy and racism, not only in my academic work, but my activism. So I don't have a solution there, but I think you're right. I don't think the left has addressed this. I think we've let this bullshit about critical race theory, that nonsense, to get propagated and not challenge it well. But you know, when a group puts out a program and we encourage everybody to attend, we hope, we want, I think, the widest range of people to attend, including people of color, including other groups that aren't represented. You know, and yet they have to decide based on their experiences with the groups whether they want to participate or not. But I do agree that we have to challenge that racism within the white left. Ricardo, as far as Ingles, I'm probably mispronouncing him. My apology. I obviously don't speak Spanish. No, the guy turned to be a dog, and he worked very much against Puerto Rico. Again, part of the problem that I know I have in my work is I can't cover everything. So I've got to go to a few cases in depth, and that's why I've focused on the Philippines and unfortunately has not included Puerto Rico. I wish others would do more writing and educate me because I need that. But there's a lot of places that I still do. And Norma, I don't understand about mansplaining other than, yes, obviously I'm a male. I'm not trying to talk down to anybody. I'm trying to argue that we need to look at this in a much more sophisticated way. I don't find your rhetoric useful. And I would encourage you to learn to speak to ordinary people, because if you start talking that way to most people, I don't think you're going to get much of a response. This is not a personal attack on you, though. It's something I think that a lot of the left does. And I think it's part of the reason that we haven't been even more successful, is we haven't treated people that we're trying to reach with respect. And I think that's got to be absolutely centered to our politics. So, I just think that we need to look at stuff more resolutely. And somebody raised the question, I guess it's back to Michael, about Stalin. There's no question that the Soviet Union was the one that broke the Wehrmacht and destroyed Nazi Germany, far, far beyond the United States. The Soviet Union suffered 27 million men, women, and children who died, versus the US suffered about 440,000, mostly military personnel in both the Atlantic and Pacific. I don't neglect, excuse me for a second, the Soviet contribution to destroying Hitler. What I do say, though, is that Stalin betrayed the communist movement in 1939 when he signed that pact with Hitler.
When he tried like crazy to prevent invasion.
Norma.
Point of order.
Yeah, here's a person who had fought fascism and said that he would never betray the interests of the working class, and he did in Germany.
Stop.
He did. No, you stop.
Oh.
Don't try to rewrite history. All right, don't try to rewrite history. I'm sorry. All right, Steve, it's yours. You got the rest.
I nuance it.
Okay, I think that we've had a useful discussion today on the role of the AFL-CIO internationally, and a lot of questions have been raised and about that. I think, again, LEPAIO has got to focus about the role of the AFL-CIO's international operations and linking up directly with workers around the world. The issue of what we face in this country and globally is a life and death question. The question of racism the massacres that are going on, the terror attacks against African Americans, against Asians, is a very deadly and serious issue. And the unions are not mobilizing and educating their own membership. The attack on women, the union should be organizing demonstrations for reproductive rights and organizing an education campaign against the attack on reproductive rights. They're not doing that. And in fact, at the AFL-CIO convention, they didn't even have a resolution on the issue of attack on reproductive rights. Why is that? They don't want to fight the reactionary forces in their union. They don't want an education campaign because that would mean political discussion, debate. That's what the union bureaucracy is afraid of. That's a danger to them. And I think that, for example, there's an epidemic of hanging nooses in this country on construction sites. And we faced it in San Francisco. I took up a fight for the unions to organize a campaign against it, an educated political campaign in the working class. The union bureaucrats do not want to do that. They don't want to bring black and white, brown, Asian workers together politically and mobilize independently. The Vermont AFL-CIO chartered a motorcycle club to organize in defense of racist attacks or attacks on LGBTQ people. The unions have to mobilize and use the power that they have. But the framework that we have in the United States with business unionism prevents that because they are mainly around the issue of making deals with the capitalists, brokering with the capitalists. And that is, that is against a political education and political mobilization of the working class against the attacks that they face. And the rise of fascism now, I think, it's dangerous, but it offers an opportunity to educate and to organize workers against fascism for the defense of the working class, for the defense of the unions and the minorities, immigrants, and others. That's what our task is. If we're going to defend all working people and unite the working class as a whole. And we can do that. Actually, there's a radicalization going on among women, among Asians, among blacks, among browns who are under these attacks. And we have to unite that. But that means a fight against business unionism, corporate unionism, which dominates the unions in this country. That ideology is reactionary and prevents political education and organization to defend the working class. At first, and what we're offering to do is to take up a struggle within the unions for the unions not to be, the AFL-CIO and its international operations not to be an appendage of the capitalists, of the imperialists. And that's an important task that we have taken on. And we hope that people support it from Puerto Rico, from every country of the world.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And with that, we will end the program. And thank you, everybody, for having such a fertile, excellent discussion. And we will continue this in one form or another next week and come back for more next Sunday. So,
Give us a chance.
Thank you, everyone.
Give us a chance to save the chat.
Save the chat. Okay, do that. I'm going to try to figure out how to end the recording here.
Well, wait.
No, we're ending the recording.
Oh.
It's open.
It's over.
Are we done? Is that it?
We're done.
Is there no happy hour?
Yeah, you could have a cup of coffee now and relax.
Marmalist, L, what's his name, is having another meeting on Ukraine and all that.
Take care, everybody.
Sargis, L. Sargis. Thank you, Martha.
Thanks. Bye.
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 Bye, everyone.